Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here for Friday Morning GM with guest co-host Matt Ruff. Matt, how you doing?
Hey, Ken. Happy to talk some football. Very depressed about our Orioles, however. How you doing,
Yeah,
Ken?
tough couple of weeks here, really, for the Orioles. They seemed like they had kind of turned around. Kramer pitched a pretty good ball game today. Then the bullpen gave it up. Um, bad, some bad mojo for the Orioles. I'm not sure where this season is going, but at least appears to be kind of spiraling out of control. And incredibly, the Yankees aren't really running away with it right now. So the Orioles are still hanging in there 5.5 or whatever it is games out. But it doesn't really look good, honestly. All right, let's talk about some Ravens news.
Yeah.
We had some big news this week. We had the release of Justin Tucker probably being the biggest single thing, not unexpected by any stretch. Ravens kind of planned this way all along.
Yeah, it seems like the plan was they're not going to do anything before the draft. They don't want to tip their hand. They wanted to make sure that they got the kicker that they wanted. It seems like Randy Brown spent a lot of time scouting Tyler Loop. Seems like he really liked him, had a really good workout. Bobby and Sarah actually on their podcast had his special teams coach on, I believe, today, and the coach had a lot of really nice things to say about Loop. Seems like he could be a really good player for us. Hopefully he makes that transition. One of the interesting things he said was he had the chance to be the most accurate field goal kicker in collegiate history, and either his snapper or holder messed up on a couple attempts that really dropped his kicking average down this past year, and said that he handled it with grace, said he wasn't out for the records. He just wanted to win for the team. He didn't dress down his teammates. He had like a rookie punter who was holding for him. So it's nice to hear some of those things about him. Hopefully he's got the right mental space that we need and comes in and brings that big leg in. And hopefully they refine him a little bit and we're in good shape for kicking for the next 10 years.
Right. Oh, very tough day in Ravens history. There have been a lot of great moments, obviously, on Tucker's resume. There was some question, it actually got asked at the rookie minicamp, was it going to be difficult to have both Tucker and Loop in the building? They've been competing for resources, Randy Brown's time, for example, snapper, long snapper, the holder, et cetera. And it might have been difficult, and that might have helped the Ravens make this decision a little earlier than they otherwise would. But they've made they built their roster changes this offseason around the possibility of needing to cut Tucker prior to 6-1. So they've used their post 6-1 designation. This is their second post 6-1 designation used on Tucker, which allows them to push some of the cap pain off into the future. Not always positive on this. I think in this case and for the amount, it's probably a good idea. But the Marcus Williams and Michael Pierce departures from Baltimore, one by cut and one by retirement, were rejiggered to be post June 1 with contractual changes to make it so. So that was a very nice positive thing. If you look at Tucker's last 3 years, they've shown a decline in terms of the field goals and extra points above expectation. He'll be 36 in November. So there was lots of reasons why this was probably the end of the road. We did hear also a lot of things said last year about it not being Jordan Stout's fault or the long snapper's fault, even though that crew is new, but it really being Tucker himself.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting to hear. His age, it does get very hard to kick. The way Tucker had his plant foot close to the ball to generate more power, I think, is great when you're in your 20s and you're flexible and you're strong, but certainly is difficult as you age. I think my question, Ken, is, in reading the statement from Eric DaCosta, they made sure to let it be said, whether this is what they actually thought or not, but that this was a football move. And I think that the day or two before, John Harbaugh mentioned that we're going to make a choice on kicker and it's going to be a football decision. They're being very careful with the legal language and what you're allowed to say or what you should or shouldn't say legally to do it. My question for you, Ken, is do you think that if there wasn't the allegations outstanding, do you think this is purely be a football move, or do you think they would have given him that extra year with the declining trend that he had improving? But he was also, like you said, a Ring of Honor player, a Hall of Fame player. Do you think they would have given him this year without the allegations?
Legitimate question. Take a look in your comments for a second. I'm asking you to turn off your video because your audio is a little choppy. What I'd say is that there would have been an option to do that had they gotten to camp and things were as they were, say, a year ago. Now with 3 consecutive tough years, I think they're going to bring in a competitor in any case, and they did that. And now I think that after seeing Loop kick the ball a little bit, they probably felt like the handwriting was on the wall, and like that. Loop has a very big leg. I mean, you really notice it in person. Doesn't have entirely a 12-6 rotation on the football, which you'd probably like to see, but he has a very, very big leg, and you can see why they like him a lot. I watched from under the uprights for a few practice kicks, so I got to enjoy that little bit at rookie minicamp. But I'm looking forward to what he brings to the team, and I think the Ravens are an outstanding organization who really has the coaching right to make a very good kicker into a great kicker, and I think Tyler Loop could be the beneficiary of that. All right, let's move on. We got another big signing. Actually, one of the major problems the Ravens had outstanding was it was not really having their first backup tackle, their first man up set. We thought maybe that'd be Emory Jones based on the draft, him being a 3rd round pick, kind of a needs pick. Maybe a little bit earlier at number 91 than I would have expected him to go. But they signed Joe Noteboom. He'll be 30 in June. He has 7 years in the league and 2,500 snaps with the Rams. Not a terrible penalty rate at 1 every 226.4 snaps. But his pass blocking has been in sharp decline the past 3 seasons. That's really bad for a left tackle. And in particular, his blocking in true pass sets has been atrocious. So it's something that hopefully he's a guy you never see on the field.
Agreed. I don't think he is that great of a player. I think he fits the need of the swing tackle, but certainly not going to be excited if he has to play. I think it's that simple.
I think it does leave open the question whether or not Rosengarten moves from right tackle to left tackle if Stanley is hurt. So if Rosengarten were hurt, it would be Noteboom at right tackle, or perhaps somebody else at right tackle. But it would be you don't have to make that change. But if you have to make the change at left tackle and you have to choose now between Noteboom and Rosengarten, I'm not sure which way the team would go.
Yeah, Ken, I think that's a good point. I think that Roger has the athleticism to do it. I hope that they'd feel comfortable just to throw him over there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they have to at some point they have to see who he is for that job, or just wait for Carson Vincent to be the guy who replaces Stanley, which is a possibility, by the way. All right, let's move on. Another piece of news today involving an ex-Raven. That's Jadeveon Clowney, was released by the Panthers. There should be lots of interest in him around the league. So if you're a Ravens fan and you're thinking, why don't the Ravens just sign him at the same kind of contract he had last time? The answer is because there's going to be too much interest after these last couple of years he's had have been pretty good, including the 23 season, which was really his best as a pro with the Ravens. I guess problem number 2 for me is, how do you fit this guy on the roster?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Right now we have Van Noy, we have Owe, we have Green, Robinson, Isaac, and then there's also Ajabo. I just don't know if there's enough room without an injury. I know there's also Malik Ham, but he seems to have an injury every year. Maybe it's likely that you do get an injury during camp. I think if the price is right, maybe it's enticing, but it would really have to be a price is right deal.
Yeah, I'm certainly in agreement on the price is right. That's true of any signing. In the Lamar Jackson second contract era, you just need to do that. But they already don't have room for David Ajabo in the roster because Isaac is the 5th outside linebacker, and he's only in his 2nd year. They don't know what they have yet. They're just certainly not going to cut Isaac to make room for Ajabo on this roster. Now, one of them could get hurt, start the season on either a PUP or in an IR status, that they have a potential to designate a guy for return later. But I think that's the only way you make room on this roster for another outside linebacker at this point. Also very excited after the draft to see what Mike Green can do, and how that top three will look together. And obviously, if you bring in Clowney, you're going to be taking snaps away from some combination of Green, Oweh, and Van Noy on passing downs.
Yeah, agreed. I like what they have. I think it's a good room. I'm hoping Green can learn from Van Noy and most likely take over, a lot of the snaps from Oweh over the next year or so once he leaves. So I'm not running out to go get Clowney, but if the situation were to arise that it meets the perfect price for them, maybe it's something I'd be willing to bend on just a bit. But, as you said, you only have so many spots on the roster for each position. And I just don't know if it fits with what we have right now.
One of the interesting things has been, this is apparently was true of Ted Williams as well, really hated to go to spring training. He would do anything he could to get out of spring training. And that often meant he would hold out until fairly late with the Red Sox before he'd sign his contract. He was constantly signing one-year deals in this days. Well, anyway, Jadeveon Clowney, Justin Houston, some other players have been guys who really don't want to go to training camp. They have their own workout regimen. They know what they're doing. They're very technically astute players. They've been in the league for years. Maybe it's attractive to go spend some time with Chuck Smith, but it's also attractive to not have to be at camp and the hot, sweltering practices and whatnot, and just go in, closer to opening day, say. And that might give the Ravens a chance to figure out who might be hurt on this roster and go after a player like Clowney. But they've also got to kind of move another parking lot piece and get Ajabo traded before the season, get some return for him. It won't be much, but perhaps a 6 for a 7 or just a conditional 7th is the standard price at the end of camp.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it must be nice to be Ted Williams, and in more ways than one. That's for darn sure. I do think there's something to be said for these pass rushers that are in their 30s. They've seen it all. There's only so much to see. And so once you've got it down pat, you can adjust, right? It's not rocket science. So I think these guys have it's pretty interesting that they can do this with their career. And like you said, injuries will play out over the course of the summer. So it might be a good spot for EDC to swoop in and pick them up if needed.
We do think of this game as being very nuanced and having all these things you look for, but there is a limit to number. And Brian Billick used to say that all the time too, is this game's only so complicated.
Right. Right.
And,
so
and
true.
For the veterans at the end of camp, they're maintaining their interest level could be a hard thing. So,
right. And plus at that point, by the time you're 32, you have a family, your family's moving around. It's a pain in the neck. It is probably easier to have most of the summer be at home, because by the time the season starts, you have to be so focused on football that you really can't be there. So to get an extra 2 months at home, I think probably matters a lot for someone who's 32 or 33, where when you're 23, you're just trying to learn football and get better.
Yeah. All right. We talked about with Voss some of the outstanding problems that were on the Ravens. And one of the interesting things is the Ravens have been very quick to move the pieces around, even just during this last week, to solve some of their outstanding 2025 problems, such that I think we're down to one great camp battle that we'll talk about a little later, and a bunch of problems for 2026 that they've kicked down the road and they have not addressed yet. But it's going to be a very difficult offseason trying to figure out how to solve the puzzle next year. But let's talk about the various things that still need to be solved. They've got the safety issue. It appears from minicamp that Starks is going to be a deep free safety. They're not going to try and move him around, make him into a versatile guy, or you play strong some, you'll play slot corner some. They're not going to do that. Hamilton will be the slot corner, or Humphrey will be the slot corner, or maybe Washington will be the slot corner. But I don't see them really tapping into Starks' versatility in year one. I see him more as a pure free safety.
Yeah, I do too. It seems like from everything I've heard, he's very cerebral, smart, intelligent. Obviously, he needs to learn. We've all seen him take bad routes on plays, or, bad jumps on balls. He also does have the ability to force turnovers, which I think is nice and will really help the Ravens come playoff time. So I think that in order to take advantage of his skill set, get him at free safety, make him learn the position, have Chuck Pagano train him up, teach him. He knows where to be so he can start generating turnovers and getting better at that position. I just don't like moving rookie players around too much to begin with, right? So let's see if we can get him a good spot back at free safety, have him learn the position, and hopefully he can be one of those weapons. I'm pretty sure I heard a stat that said in the Ravens playoff losses in the Lamar Jackson era, the Ravens have something like a -13 turnover differential, right? That just, yeah, I mean, that's just not going to cut the mustard. So hopefully he can learn the position, get a little bit better angles when he's coming in, maybe not have as big of a blow up. I think he had a couple against Texas, maybe against Florida, and clean up some of the pursuit angles, and then really become a much better coverage safety and have his coverage metrics start to improve greatly.
Right. I think anytime you move a player from position to position, and we saw this with Brandon Stevens as well, it becomes more difficult for them to be the master of all of them. And Starks is much more likely to succeed as a free safety only. And it's also where the Ravens need him. So, I one of the reasons I wasn't crazy about the draft pick is I thought they paid extra for some of that versatility, where another team really could have tapped into that. But I think the Ravens, still have a good player. Maybe a top of the second round kind of talent in terms of his where I would have taken him based on who he is as a coverage player. Anyway, they need him on the back end. I'm sure he'll stay there, but I still think they're kind of a one deep safety short of maximum flexibility, because this team doesn't just have a need to have their safety play slot corner and a big nickel. They probably also have a need to have a dime back in fairly regularly. That would require 4 safeties for some plays. And it might be Ardarius Washington in the slot. It could be Marlon Humphrey. So it is possible you can address it from corner and an inside out way, but it's in a back to front way is going to be the typical way to address the dime back position at least, and potentially also the slot corner role. And, to do that comfortably, they probably need one more safety who's a special teams player who can also play the back end comfortably and not make mistakes. That's all I really want, is not make mistakes. Eddie Jackson made a ton of mistakes. That's why he's not a Raven. He did play some special teams, but he just made a ton of mistakes on the back end. They need to avoid that, and have a 5 to make 4 unit would really be ideal. Keep one guy, activate all 5 for any game, because the Ravens have had some problems in recent years keeping all their guys on the field and then losing the ability to run all of their planned defensive packages for a game.
Yeah, agreed. I think they're missing one safety that can play the split back end. Eddie Jackson, if he worked out, could have been the perfect candidate with his cost and hopefully his experience. It just didn't work out at all.
Right.
Ken, my question for you is, so knowing that that's a need that's out there, do you still foresee the Ravens carrying both Braid and Kane for the year? I know we actually started talking on Twitter because of this about a year ago, where it was driving both of us crazy. Do you see another year where they put this much emphasis on the special teams safeties?
I don't think you can have 2 guys who just play special teams and can't really make a defensive contribution. I don't think you can have that, period, even if you're talking about linebacker or wherever. I think you need to have players who can do both. It's just critically important, and it comes up all the time in games, and you end up having to stick somebody in there. And the last thing they want to have to do is put either Sanusi Kane or Bo Braid on the back end. If you can't live with that outcome, then don't have it be part of your plan, which means one of them can make the team, maybe. Probably, honestly, I'd try it out in the preseason. I'd see who could play the back end better. Maybe it's Kane. Maybe he's the better special teams player. Maybe not. If you figure out that that's the guy you can live with on the back end, then you keep him as the 5th safety, and you move on from Braid. But I don't think you can have both of them. I think they probably need to have 5 safeties active. So I'm getting a real back end guy, and then I'm going to keep one of these 2 guys if I'm running the team.
Yeah, agreed. But it did seem like last year, for some reason, they were comfortable with having both of them on the roster, and then at times rostering for game day 3 or 3.5 defensive tackles, which seemed like complete blasphemy to me. Just such a risk. And Travis Jones, I think, got hurt in the middle of one of those games, but I feel like they really played with fire last year. I would hope they wouldn't do that again. And I just don't know if Kane or Braid are that valuable that if you lost one, you feel like you really missed out on something, right? I mean, they're special team safeties, you know. You can't risk over rostering.
Right. I wouldn't, your net investment, it's a sunk cost now anyway, but it wasn't a lot. I mean, that tells you right there how much they really believe in these guys for starters. They didn't draft them with a 5th round pick, or they didn't, move up to make sure nobody else got them. And Braid was undrafted. It's don't pretend that these guys are something they aren't. And we've seen both of them play in the preseason. Both of them are downhill good players when they're in the backfield, good players in run fits. They can help you out in some legitimate ways defensively. It's just not the ways the Ravens really need to have. And it's kind of like having a guy who, I don't know, a platoon guy who can only hit left-handed pitching, which right now seems awfully valuable to the Orioles because the Orioles are like historically bad versus left-handed pitching. But
unbelievably valuable right now.
No, normally those guys are not very valuable. Guys who,
right.
They end up being Benny Ayala. They end up being the 25th man on your roster and whatnot. You can't afford to have a guy like that around. So I'm hoping, they get a guy who's a really good back to front player who can handle the back end, knows how to play a loose bracket, knows how to play for the football, knows how to take away space on the field from the opposing quarterback, particularly in terms of his eyesight. And say, no, I don't want to throw the ball there. That's what I want. I don't want a guy who's just going to be reacting to the player, always coming downhill, trying to make run fits, or rushing the passer even, because that's all you think you can use him for. So let's move on. Let's move on to a different position. I think we kind of talked this one to death. But the defensive line was something, you just mentioned in terms of the scarcity of players they had for some games. Part of that was age related. You had an older Brent Urban. Now, I don't believe Urban got hurt during the year, but Pierce did. And right, Pierce had had a remarkable injury-free year the year before. Remarkable because he basically never had a year like that in his career. And in 2024, unfortunately, he missed a lot of time. And he came back. He's massively out of shape in terms of how he finished the season. So his retirement didn't really come as a surprise. And now the Ravens are set up with their biggest single camp battle at nose tackle. And it's interesting because basically there's a guy on the sideline basically threatening to pick up the phone and pick up any one of maybe 10 different guys who would be out there who are veteran nose tackles they could bring in. And all you have to do is think back to 2019 and remember them picking up D'Amato Pecco and Jelly Ellis.
Yep.
Those two guys. And street nose tackles are a fairly large size and shape pool that you can draw from. And Pecco was very good. Ellis was okay. These are guys who helped the Ravens to turn that defense around. This year, they're going with 2 young guys because I think they want to make the unit younger to start with. So I think they're very much their predilection would be for one of these 2 guys to win the job and the other to go to the practice squad. And that's Nash Hutmaker, the Nebraska nose tackle, who's had some serious juice the last couple of years and some things he's been able to do, and Jason Jones of Auburn, the other nose tackle, who's more of your traditional size at 6'6", 325. Hutmaker's a little small, but has the remarkable wrestling background. We talked about that on previous shows. Not going to do that again here, but it'll be one of the really fun battles of camp to see those guys both on the field and in the games.
Yeah, certainly looking forward to the camp battle. I like that Hutmaker has the penetrating ability. I feel like that's deadly from the interior. So I'd love to see it. But, with Jones, 6'6", 325, 335, he's a big boy. I mean, sometimes all you need is someone to anchor the point of attack and not let the guards or the center climb up onto the linebackers, right? Kind of like, Ray Lewis always wanted. So, I'd like to see both of them improve. One of them on the practice squad, like you said, one of them on the roster. And, instead of going with a veteran for, $1.1 million, you go with a rookie for $800,000. I mean, maybe that's where you can end up saving a couple nickels and hopefully you have one or both of these guys on the team for the next 3 years after the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the key. The savings this year, maybe a couple $100,000, not insignificant, but a little something, but not significant, I should say. But the great point is getting him for 3 years after. If you have the option on these players for 3 additional years, because you have them for 2 years as an exclusive rights free agent, and then another year as a restricted free agent where they actually get a tender and could possibly leave. That's just a remarkable value. So it's basically provides 4 years of cheap labor, and if either of those work out, it's obviously the preferred solution. The other guy they have on the line is Peebles, so it could be he's a 5th round pick. He's certainly going to make the team, I would think, unless something goes drastically wrong. He's undersized, another guy who penetrates a lot, really a pass rush specialist. He has a lot of different, pretty advanced toolkit already. So he's somebody I hope that Smith can work with, make him into a better player, and probably make some selections about which tools will work at the NFL level and which won't, based on who he is as a player. But it's a chance for the Ravens to get a lot younger, because they effectively will have replaced the best friends of Urban and Pierce, which I'm really sorry to see go, with 2 guys who are rookies.
Yeah, for sure. But you need youth, and like you say, you can't be holding on to the old players for too long. It's too physical of a game. I wanted to see them get younger. I was really happy when they got Peebles. He's certainly undersized, but I'd like to see the coaching staff continue to work with him. And it seems like he's got a lot to prove and a lot to show. And I think he can bring a lot of pass rush juice. And as the 4th or 5th person in a rotation, I think he'll be pretty valuable, and maybe he can overcome some.
If you're looking for a better way to unwind, focus, or even get a good night's sleep, listen up. Let me tell you about Mood, the online cannabis company that's changing the game when it comes to functional gummies. They've crafted a whole line of federally legal THC blends designed to help with everything from stress to sleep to mental clarity, and even some spicier needs if you're into that. Now, what makes Mood different? They go beyond just THC. They pair it with herbs and adaptogens to create targeted effects that you won't find in any other dispensary. And every gummy is made with pesticide-free, small farm American cannabis, so you're getting quality that you can trust. I've tried their sleep gummies, and let me tell you, it takes about 15 minutes, and I'm out cold, no grogginess, no weird side effects, getting some of the best sleep I've gotten in my life when I take one of these gummies. And if you need a mood boost, there are Epic Euphoria gummies, game changers. And right now, Mood is giving listeners 20% off their first order by using the promo code RAVENS at checkout. So head on over to mood.com, find the perfect gummy for whatever life throws your way, and don't forget to use the promo code RAVENS to save 20%.
Some of those size limitations and be really disruptive. Maybe he doesn't always close on as many sacks as you would like, because he just doesn't have that length to wrap up all the tackles or get where he needs to be. But if he can at least be a disruptor and get the quarterback moving, or get a running back moving if he's in there on run plays, which shouldn't be too often, but that'll be pretty valuable for the Ravens. And they have a lot of cleanup guys on that line in the linebacking core.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's one that bears mention. People think of 2-gapping defensive linemen as guys who deny space and hold the point of attack, and they're making everybody around them better. And that's there's an element of truth to that, but you can also get that from penetration as well. And Peebles and Hutmaker are both penetrators, and they will, I think, not only will they be hopefully productive tacklers. In Hutmaker's case, I have no doubt about it, because he fits the Kelly Gregg mold as a guy who's got that wrestling background, will get people to the ground when he touches them, and will penetrate in order to be around the play a lot of times, and also hustle. By the way, also looks like Kelly Gregg. If you see him up close, yeah, he really does look a lot like him. So anyway, when you penetrate, you force the running back oftentimes into a bad decision. The backfield is bifurcated, as I say. He has to make a choice to go to the left or the right of you. He doesn't want to run right into you. That's one choice he doesn't want to make. So if he makes a choice to run right or left of you, he may find more open ground that way, or he may actually turn himself in a position that makes a very bad play out of the situation. And that's something that the penetrator doesn't always get credit for. When you're nose tackle, it's a thankless job. You're not, a lot of times you're not making the tackle, you're making a play so somebody else can make it. But it's a they can do a lot of damage by being in the backfield and forcing the play to be other than as expected. And I'm hoping Nash will bring some of that in the passing game as well. And we've had last few years, it's been Pierce and Jones to a lesser degree. Jones is more of a guy who tries to beat a guy on a block or beat a double team or force you to double team him and then punish you if you don't double team him. Hutmaker is a guy who I think he's going to have to get in the backfield to be useful in the pass rush. Jason Jones could be the guy who get push in order to morph the pocket and make it uncomfortable for the quarterback.
Yeah, I see Peebles and Hutmaker as higher variance players where I think that they may get beat from time to time, but they'll also create plays more often because they'll be able to shoot a gap and really just turn a play around. Maybe having some of that higher variance leads to a little bit more turnovers. I just feel like the Ravens defense, it typically is pretty sterile, which is, it seems like over the past year or so, they've, turnovers have been limited, but they've done a pretty good job on defense. Maybe this just allows them to create an extra turnover or two when it matters so that some of these games aren't so close. And, we can get some of our players out in that fourth quarter. And, we really should be shellacking a lot of the teams we play. I know the schedule's tough, but, an extra turnover in the first quarter would really make some of these games lopsided.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Peebles, a player like that, is a guy who allows you to play him at nose tackle when the other team has to pass on every play. I think that he's a guy who's good for that. I think Travis Jones would be good for that too, but you can't have Travis Jones on the field every play. So they'll use him in a way they use the race car formation, say in 2019 or 2018 under Martindale, where they're trying to get multiple outside linebackers, just multiple pass rushers on the field. For a lot of consecutive, it's basically 13% of the season they did that. They ran that more than they ran the base defense in 2019. It was largely because they were up in games so much, and they go out to LA and smash them 45-6. But in a game like that, the last quarter and a half, they're basically in race car every snap. So it's fun to watch when they can get that done. And I think you're right. By the way, if you look at all of the Ravens' defensive picks, very turnover minded. Peebles is maybe the least of them, but no doubt about it, both Green and Starks are turnover players. They put the quarterback in jeopardy, force him into make some bad decisions. Also, occasionally, we hope, force a fumble from Mike Green. And then Starks, already looks like he has some of those loose bracket characteristics that I really like in a free safety. So, and it's hard for me to draw that because they have a rehearsal practice at rookie minicamp. But one of his really nice plays of the day was to get in a nice bracket with longer beam on the right sideline. But part of that is he's just not allowed to contest for the football. Those are the rules of that practice.
Ken, do you think that Broderick Washington's spot is safe this year, or do you think it could be possible that maybe they like Jones and Hutmaker and Peebles, and maybe it squeezes Broderick out of a spot? I know there's not much of a financial savings. It's almost just kind of a one-for-one. Whoever you replace him on the roster with is basically what you get. But could you see that happening, or do you think he's fairly secure?
It's not impossible. It'd be another big youth move if they decided to go with all three of them. There are reasons why it might make sense. Like if you want to move a Hutmaker to be a 3-tech, say, instead, maybe on early downs, maybe that could make sense. And then he's more of a replacement for Brandon Williams. It's not obvious to me that they would do it. I think that the pedigree is low enough on those guys, both of them probably, that they have a chance to keep them for a few weeks on the practice squad. Remember, that replacement level is a descending target. That line keeps coming down, and eventually it meets the players on your roster squad, and the squad, they become practice squad, and they become targets for all your opponents and all the other teams in the league. So I think it's a matter of time before a player like Hutmaker or Jason Jones would be taken. I'm not 100% sure either of them would be snapped up in the initial cuts. It could happen. It kind of depends on how people, teams' depth around the league holds up, but that could happen too.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't supersede the need for Travis Jones to be extended, though. It certainly seems like he is still a big cog in the defense, and I have to admit, I'm a little. I don't know if I'm concerned or just maybe a little surprised that of that pool of the 4 or 5 guys we've been talking about all winter and fall that they could extend it. They haven't really made any progress in any extension talks, and that even includes Lamar or Andrews on top of the likely Travis Jones, Linderbaum, Hamilton group.
Yeah, it's very concerning. And what I like to hear is DaCosta talks about a lot of balls in the air, and I think the draft, that process takes away time and attention. It just doesn't. It's not just a matter of they're waiting to see what they have, but I would expect between now and the opening of regular training camp, not necessarily OTAs or anything else that's going on, but by the start of regular training camp, I'm expecting at least one signing and maybe one more before the season starts from that group. I think there's just too much risk. And let me move on enough because the next thing I want to talk about is the offensive line for a second. And there is Daniel Faalele is in that group of players who could be extended now. I can understand a reason not to do it. I can understand a reason to do it because it'd be you could potentially gain about as much value as you could on any one player by signing Faalele for multiple years. But there is risk there if he reverts to being less of a lineman than he was at the end of this last year, then that could be a significant concern. Where do you stand on that? Are you lukewarm only on signing Faalele, against it, or for it?
I would say I'm lukewarm. I think if the price is right, I'm for it. I think that he showed some good improvement. Warhop really coached him up. I mean, they had a lot of work to do to get him, where he was those last few games of the year. So I think if the price is right, I think it's certainly worth the risk. I don't know if I have a price in my head, but maybe something like 3 for $9 or something to that effect. 3 for $10 is where I might be comfortable, where maybe you guarantee 50% of that. So the first year and a half, and kind of have that split in the second year. I'd probably be okay with that. I also think he could in a pinch play right tackle, which is nice. So yeah, I like Faalele and I think he can improve. I do think that you're limited with his physical limitations, just limit your line and what you can do in general. And I don't like having that. I feel like Linderbaum next to him, his limitations also limit what you can do in some spots. So, is he the perfect player? No, but 3 for $9 or something like that. Would I take that risk for, 4 or 5 million guaranteed? Yeah, I probably would.
Yeah, that's outstanding points. Both of those outstanding points, because both of them are limited players, and the Ravens really are missing any kind of mobility on the offensive line and on the interior offensive line, period. Other than Linderbaum, they really don't have anybody who moves exceptionally well. Dellinger might be the best bet. And that's why I think he's a real candidate to replace Linderbaum in 26 if the contract talks can't be brought to fruition. So if they go through the season and Linderbaum and his camp basically say, I'm not signing with the Ravens for anything less than a record-setting contract, or there's just a gap between the two. It doesn't have to be a matter of a record-setting contract. It could be that there's a $3.5 million gap between the two sides in terms of AAV, and they just can't bridge it. Then I think that you probably are better served to move ahead with a player who's 80% of the player at 20% of the price, the absolute classic thing. If you have Dellinger replace a Linderbaum, and I'm not sure he's 80% of the player. I'm really not, but if he could be, and I know he's less than 20% of the price. So you have that to look forward to. I am now much happier with the kind of 6 to make 3 interior offensive line hopes that the Ravens have. And it's not like there are a bunch of great players in that group. Linderbaum is the best. They have Voorhees, Linderbaum, Faalele, backed up by Cleveland, Jones, and Dellinger. I think that group is very strong, particularly when measured by the skill level of the 6th player. And so much of offensive line play, is worked around how do you deal with the lack of continuity or with continuity issues that arise normally. Last year, they got really good play out of Patrick McCary, which was a big part of keeping the Ravens offensive line pretty good the whole year.
Yeah, and I think that even though the interior of the line may shift around a little bit, Voorhees had the season where he sat out and then, now is going into his second season, or really third with the team. Linderbaum's going into his 4th season. Faalele's going into his 4th season. Cleveland's going into his 5th season. You've got a lot of guys who have been around for a long period of time. They should be able to bring in Jones and Dellinger and really work them in. I mean, Cleveland should be serviceable at any of the positions. I'm not saying great, but he should be serviceable. I'm I'm actually probably, if I look at this group, I might be a little bit more uncertain on Voorhees. I just wasn't that wowed by
Sure.
what I saw. Just didn't seem like he had as much functional strength as I would have thought he would have had. Lower body strength seemed like it was limited. We know he can, bench press a Mack truck 100 times, but in watching him play, I'm not sure if he had that on the lower half. I'm hoping that him coming back from these leg injuries, they take years to heal. And so I'm hoping that this offseason, he's really getting stronger on that lower half and that actually makes a difference. But like you said, it's a decent group of 6. It might not be the most top heavy talented group, but I'm pretty happy with what they have. Would be a little bit more thrilled if Jones didn't have the injury, right? Was working out right now, but they liked him enough to take him. So, hopefully him and Dellinger can bring some skills and be really a big part of the line and, next year or two.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on every one of those points, by the way, about Voorhees as well, that despite the fact, I don't think he's as sure a starter as the incumbent as Fa'alele is, not by a long shot. I think Fa'alele has the job. And almost in a sense, there's nothing else to do with Daniel Fa'alele. You can't move him anywhere. I mean, I guess you could try and move him back at right tackle if you had depth issues and you wanted to make him your backup tackle. You could put him in shrink wrap and wait for something like that to happen. I wouldn't be in favor of that. So I think he's at the right position. He's at the position he can play best at right guard. I think there's reason to hope for improvement. I think that Warhop brought out some things in him that Joe D was hoping could be brought out in him, particularly in terms of pass blocking, in terms of reduction in penalties. And I think he's pretty much a lock to be the opening day right guard. Whereas I think Voorhees, it's very much up in the air. I think Dellinger could be competing for that spot. In theory, I think Cleveland could be competing for that spot. I don't think that's how they'll do it. I think they want to basically give Cleveland the McCary role where he's the first man up and can solve an interior offensive line player problem at any one of the 3 positions. But as always, if everybody plays like crap in the preseason, if people look as bad as they can look, then, hey, Cleveland might be one of the solutions in there somewhere.
Agreed. Ken, do you see Emory Jones as a right tackle of the future, or I can't remember. Are you the type who thinks that he might have to move inside at guard?
I believe he's a longer guy. So I think that Jones is a guy I would hope would be able to play tackle. He's got way more value if he can provide some tackle play. But he was a guy, and he's definitely on the list of players that might be able to play guard and then play tackle when you need him in the future. Let's stick a pin in that for a second, because I think the most interesting story in the offensive line is Carson Vincent, and a guy who a 5th round pick, actually, top of the 5th round pick, because they traded back 5 spots in that inexplicable trade that you and I witnessed together. They did come up with an explanation for that after the fact. I don't know if I'm really buying it, but Vincent, I don't expect him to be activated the entire year, and yet he has to stay on the roster or they'll lose one of 2 things: either the right for him to practice or the likelihood that would be cut and have to pass through waivers and probably be taken by another team. So I think they're going to have to keep him for the entire season. And that means one of their inactives for every week has already been decided. When they're walking wounded, get to a point where they can no longer stand it, they might have to IR Vincent,
yes.
A perfectly healthy player. They might have to IR. But that's the way football works, honestly. But I really appreciated watching how invested Warhop is in that selection. He apparently banged the table for him, and it looks like he wants to coach him basically every single rep.
Ken, did I read that each team now has the ability to IR 2 people at roster crunch time, and it was a change in the rule this year? I don't want to misexplain it. Okay. Could you foresee Vincent? Okay, so he's 6'7", 315 or something to that effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he needs to put on some size, some weight. Could you foresee him being IR'd at the start of the season for 8 weeks and coming back mid-season? Or do you think he's too far from having his body makeup where it needs to be, that, May starting in May through, October, that he couldn't get his body where he needs to be? Do you think that's a possibility, or is that just a bridge too far?
I think him playing it all in 2025 is a bridge too far. The guy, he's a rail, tall and lean. It's not like he's built terribly or anything, but he's
sure.
just he's not strong, and he needs a ton of time in a weight room. A lot of times, it's like platitude is a year in an NFL weight room kind of thing. A year might not be enough for him in an NFL weight room, frankly.
Right.
He's a very long way to go, and he's gotten away with some things. If you look at him on tape, there's some great highlights of just throwing down these FCS linemen, edge players.
Right.
And he just will not enjoy that sort of athletic advantage over NFL players of that same ilk. So it's both. I would not put him on IR, because as soon as he goes to IR, he can't practice. I think he is so far behind in both components based on what I saw. Like Vincent, Warhop had something to say to Vincent after basically every single rep on last Sunday. So I'll just say that was, I have never seen it be that extreme. And I went through Coach D, watching him try to coach up Fa'alele. Fa'alele was clearly his guy. He got more angry with him than anybody, and it's because he had so much invested in him that he was doing it. And I see that same relationship between Vincent and Warhop, and I think that there's a long way technically and there's a long way physically to go. And they've bought themselves a great airframe. They've got exactly the right kind of thing to pack all the weapons onto, but they've got to get to packing. That's going to be a while.
And that makes me think too that it makes it even less likely that you can carry Braid and Kane. I know different side of the ball, different position group. I know some people might say, how the hell could that be related to offensive line and safety? But when you're counting some of those special teams only players at the bottom of the roster, you can only afford so many of them. And like you and I have debated over the years, I'm not even sure how many you can afford, maybe a couple, but they've got to be very judicious here.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money. And it is kind of like having a special teams only player to have a developmental offensive lineman on the roster. I'm still happy the Ravens did it, because the situation is right. The Ravens have 2 or even 3 years to determine if Carson Vincent can play tackle. Probably 2 full years they're going to know whether he can make it or not. I certainly hope so. Let's put it that way. But in 2027, he actually might be needed. And Stanley would be potentially let out of the third year of his contract a year early. And they might really want Carson Vincent to step in at left tackle. And if that happens, then this is going to really seem like time and a roster spot very well spent. The Ravens missed out on some players like Spencer Brown. There have been some other developmental left tackles, and some of them end up being good. Brown is probably the best of that group. That went on to get a big second contract now from the Bills.
For sure.
All right, let's move on, because I got one more thing I want to talk about. That is that while all of the 2025 problems are basically in the process of being addressed, and with the exception of maybe finding that split field safety, the one additional guy they need, the 2026 Ravens right now have a bunch of impending rocks in the water they need to look out for. They have 4 tight end contracts, including Ricard. I'm including him in this group, which all come due at the end of 2025. So that's a problem. They have a running back contract in Derrick Henry that comes due at the end of 2025. Again, that's going to be a big investment to get him added or extended as it stands now. He's one of the group. He's really got to be tossed in there with Travis Jones and some other players. The problem with Henry is your extension on him may just be a 1 or 2 year deal. It won't be a multi-year deal like it would be like a 4-year deal with Travis Jones, where you'd be looking to extend him. So it's expensive and short term, the extension of Henry, and the others. I mean, likely is going to be big money. Andrews will be smaller money, but it won't be nothing. And you also have to worry about his declining years once you sign him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the more I think about the next year, it seems like the franchise tag could come into play. I think Isaiah likely could be a good candidate for it.
Yeah.
I wonder if Derrick Henry would be a good candidate for it, right? Because isn't it the average of the top 5 average values? I mean, I don't know how much, aside from the Saquon deal, which seems a bit ridiculous, just the whole structure of it, but he's a great player. Maybe franchising either Henry or Likely, because of the position they play, gives you a little bit of benefit there where, maybe even if we do lose Ricard and Andrews and Kolar, you can still franchise Likely and know that you still have your tight end number 1 there. But I think your point is pretty interesting around if you're looking at tight end and running back, the running backs, okay, Derrick Henry, he only has 1 year left. Justice Hill only has a couple years left.
Two.
Same
Yep.
thing. Yep. Keaton Mitchell only has a couple years left. Rasheen Ali is not something that we're going to really bank the future on. So it's not just the tight end room that could see a lot of turnover. That running back room could also see a ton of turnover. And, for the Ravens, tight ends and running backs are really important.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. That entire skill position group. And remarkably, they won't still have a wide receiver problem next year. They'll have to be thinking like they are this year about some extensions for players like Bateman, maybe an early extension for Flowers. But they'll be, next year at the end of the year, the 5th-year option situation comes up for Flowers. They'll certainly take it. And then they may be able to work out a deal from then, or they may not. In the case of Bateman, they'll be in the same position they are with like a Travis Jones or an Isaiah Likely right now, in terms of him still having a year on the contract and really wanting to extend him. And, they feel very fortunately, they don't have an issue at wide receiver next year. The only guy they're going to lose is Hopkins. And then they'll have players like, they have Wester coming in as a rookie. They'll have Walker. They still don't know what he can do yet. They have Tylan Wallace, who is only signed for 1 year, I believe. I believe Wallace is not a 2-year deal. So he'd be another one that they have to probably re-sign. But we're talking about totally different orders of magnitude in terms of the contract when you're talking about a player like Wallace. Wallace is, by the way, perfect example of a guy who plays special teams and wide receiver, and that's exactly what you want from your back end of the roster guys. You want a special teams player who can also give you a contribution on his side of the ball.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that makes the next couple months for EDC even more important, because like you said, that the draft process is exhausting. It takes a lot of time. I'm sure you felt exhausted by the end of the whole draft process, right? So you can only imagine that they got to get the guys signed, which they've got most of them signed. But now is that little bit of a lull period where there needs to be some movement on Lamar, Andrews, the rest of the tight ends, then some of the big players like Travis Jones and Derrick Henry, et cetera. They need to knock out. I would say I would feel okay if they could knock out 2 deals over the next 2 months or so, and at least have a little bit more certainties where they stand. Even they lost players like Kadir Ishmael to the Raiders, right? So someone who maybe you were hoping to have, who was learning the system on the practice squad, hadn't accrued any service time yet. You were hoping he could step in. Now he's gone, and you're really starting from square one.
Yeah, they have a Minnesota Duluth tight end is the only guy they have in sight currently. Now that could change. They could pick somebody up, but as of right now, that's the top practice squad candidate they've got. Be interesting to see how that works out, but I really don't want to see how the tight end room crumble at the end of this next year and just see at that point, we probably should have done something. Or regardless of what the answer is, I don't think the correct answer right now is do nothing. I think the right answer right now is do something to give yourself some roster flexibility for 2026, whether that's an extension or a trade or whatever it might be. Extension or trade are really the 2 options available to them now.
Yeah, pretty hard to believe that we're stating on a Ravens podcast, hey, we don't have many wide receiver issues or any issues at all, but running back and tight end, we're terrified as to what's going to happen. You almost would think we're living in some sort of bizarro universe here.
Great having you back on the show as a co-host. Really appreciate you, Matt. I'm sure Voss is going to be back probably on about a monthly basis. We've been talking about before the season starts, but it's great to have you back again. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, you can find me at Kid Rock on Twitter, and Ken, really appreciate it. Had a great time.
All right. Other folks out there, if you'd like to do a film study short, this is your time. Please hit me up with ideas. I'm also looking for somebody, by the way, if you're listening to this and you have experience with the NFL Fast Start database, I need something extracted from that. I need some help with a Java or Python guy who can help me get at some questions or get at some data for a show I'm trying to do on offensive line scoring. But if you have that ability, hit me up and I'd love to hear from you. Matt, thanks again for joining me.
Thanks a lot, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.